Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode.
All right, here we are.
This is why I don't think we should try to cram all the on-demand stuff into 1 week, because I think we'll get crazy real quick if we try to do it all at once.
We'll get
And by
crazy,
we,
or
I mean me.
you? Yeah, Chapter 3, Quieting the Mind, which is
I'm a pro at this.
well...
I will be by the end of this episode anyway.
Oh, really? That's all it'll take?
That's all it takes.
Good to know. Chapters 1 and 2 kind of set us up about the concept of a self-1 and self-2, which is the self-1 is kind of the controlling, judging,
overanalyzer.
Yeah, dishing out lots of instructions, and self-2 is kind of the natural performing state. That would be, if you're fully in self-2 mode, then that would be the equivalent of the zone or
flow state kind of deal.
So then, how do we get there? And this is, I think it's super easy to go through this and think that the goal is to enter some robotic, non-emotional state over a long period of time.
Correct.
And that does not happen.
This is like a permanent state of being.
Yeah, it comes and goes so quickly. I know there's a pretty good interview with Novak Djokovic, and he was talking about all of this. They even had kind of a interview in Sports Illustrated not long ago where he talked about the same stuff. And it's okay to be emotional, like between points or whatever, but you can't perform while you're emotional.
In that state, right.
Having the tools to move out of that, what are you doing? That sucked.
Yeah.
Mode, and quickly back into
just doing
quiet mind performing mode. Takes training and discipline. So we'll talk plenty about that. But the whole quiet the mind thing is to shut up self-1 as much as possible. And that's where, all goes back to, this high percentage of our thoughts are so critical and negative about our own performance and circumstance that, if everything that flowed out of our minds naturally was just awesome, beautiful, loving, that might be one thing.
Sure.
But it sure isn't.
Sure isn't.
So then learning how to keep self-1 at bay, and that is the whole quiet your mind thing. And that's all these activities are so different. When like golf is not the same as football or baseball. Like golf, the ball's sitting there, and baseball, it's coming. Whether you're in the field, you're hitting. And I remember the first time I ever tried to play golf, par 3, and I just assumed, like, I'm fairly athletic.
Yep.
Ball's just sitting there. I'm going to rip this thing. And, because I could hit a baseball that's moving fast, And, of course, I was an idiot, just a barbarian. And so I quickly came to realize that I was not as good as I thought I was going to be, or even close. So all I did was get angrier and angrier and throwing my clubs all over the place and
first time
screaming
playing
obscenities. Yeah, I was like 19. Of course, the guy I was with.
You sound like a real treat as a teenager.
I don't know if I'd describe it as such.
That's being a little sarcastic.
Facetious?
See,
Yes.
I was going to say facetious, but I just went like sarcastic.
It works either way.
It's anonymous.
So, needless to say, I have no idea how many strokes were involved in that little
Or lost
9-hole. Yeah. And then my ultimate was on the last hole. I stomped the hole in for real. So I'm this. Yeah, it was nuts. And then the poor clubhouse guy, because whoever played through obviously had some complaints, and so I'm just sitting there steaming at the end of it, and the clubhouse guy comes down. Excuse me, sir, was there a problem on the last hole? No, he was nervous because I looked like a lunatic, and
Was there a problem with the last
Was there a
hole?
problem on that last hole? So I remember, I'll leave out all the F bombs in between every other word. I said, yeah, there was a problem on the last hole. My ball wouldn't go in it. Um, I'm sure I 8-putted it. And so, yeah, that was like slung my putter, stomped the hole in. But I finished with, but don't worry, I'm never coming back here again.
Won't see my face ever again.
So sigh of relief. Okay, then, thank you. And walked back to the clubhouse. And I literally did never go there again. But I was the exact opposite of a quiet mind. And my performance showed. One, my expectations were absurd.
Fair.
But two, there was so much going on in my mind that was wildly unhelpful that I had no chance to even play a decent game for someone playing the first time. I was going to be as terrible as possible, and that's what I was.
Well, when your expectations are too high, going into something you haven't done before, and you expect that because you're good at other things that fall in the wide umbrella category of sports, you not only does your ego get hit because you're not doing well at golf, this new sport that you assumed you'd be good at, but you also then turn to like, well, I must not be a good athlete, which bleeds into the rest of the other things that you felt like was part of your core.
Well,
right? Like expectations.
For me, golf is one of these. Like some people argue, like it's not even a sport.
It's a game.
Which
I know.
It's a sport.
It's a sport.
Like,
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's really hard.
Really hard.
And
yeah, my husband always argues. He's like, it's a game, and I'm like,
like Monopoly. No,
right, not the
same.
Nope,
not the same. So, but I had a lot of ego involved that was really unbelievably unrealistic and just foolish and childish. And the way I responded was equally foolish and childish. Yeah, it was embarrassing. When I think back now, it's just incredible. But I'm so evolved as a person, I'm willing to share that episode in a podcast. I know, I've come a long way. But obviously that's like worst case scenario for an unquiet mind. But we definitely don't coach to produce environments where we allow the mind to be quiet. And then we don't prepare as performers, whatever it is, to have a quiet mind.
Yeah. I thought in this chapter was interesting about, because I could very much relate to this, of when you think back to times you had a poor performance, you can like create a checklist and identify the specific things that you can say you did poorly or did wrong or that were bad. But if you go back and think about the time that you had a really good performance, you can't necessarily say like, oh, I think my arm swing was just like that. You know, I was doing that just right that day.
Good way to put it.
And that's very relatable, is when you're doing poorly and that triggers that mind to say, well, this is bad and this is bad and this is not as good as I could do and this should be done this way. But when you're playing well and you are in that quieted mind because you're just in the flow state and just using, then those judgments don't come up, because I mean, I think we're definitely less likely to praise ourselves for our performance than to criticize ourselves for our performance. For sure. But I also think that in that moment when you are able to do things successfully or perform well, you don't feel compelled to need to praise yourself. You're just doing it. And so when you're sort of playing that unconscious mind, I'm thinking back to, I shared this, pretty much my last match that I was playing well in college before the first match when my shoulder started hurting for the first time. I think they were playing at state during a spring tournament. And I mean, I don't know that I could say I was ever playing better than that day. But I don't remember what it, like, I don't have any record. Right. I just know that I was playing so well. Everything was just on point. And then this started talking. But I have plenty of matches, way more, where I'm like, oh yeah, that one, I really couldn't do this, or I really couldn't, hit my serve spot to save my life, whatever it is. And so I think it just goes to show that when you are in that really unconscious playing flow state, it is quiet. Like, it's quiet from the judgment and it's quiet from the talking. It's both. You're just doing it. And I think that is obviously where we want to end up, but very challenging to get there intentionally, I think.
Yeah, and that's where...
You can't just send yourself there.
No, you can't will yourself. I've said this 50 times already probably, but you just create the environment where it is allowed to happen. And thinking is almost automatically going to produce judgment, which will produce tension, which will guarantee that you are not playing smoothly or fluidly or anywhere near your capabilities as a result. And, I've read golfers, like, they'll talk about how they don't remember a hole at all.
Yeah. There's a lot of golfers who remember every hole and want to tell you every detail about it.
Yeah. There's
those are my least favorite golfers.
Yeah, those are great to be stuck listening to. But golf lends itself to a lot
Yeah.
of analysis and technical thoughts. There's so much time to think. And if you don't have a trained mind that will kind of keep you between the rails and put you in position to perform well, then you are in a
Well,
lot of trouble.
the time thing is so, I think, such a critical aspect of golf specifically, because you could have a killer shot off the tee, and then you got to walk 150 yards to your next one and keep that in check until you hit. It's not just like, oh, that was great, let's do it again right now.
Right.
You have that time to walk to the next spot, whatever it is. Whereas volleyball, it's, points over, we're serving in 10 seconds again. It's a whole lot faster. And I was thinking about and I've said this 100 times on this podcast, but I'll just try anything. And I would rather just get started and assess once I get to a fork in the road, or once I discover it's not working right, than to overanalyze and then not get started. My mom always is like, you're not afraid. You're just like, I'd be reading up on this and researching for months before I just stepped into this, and you just go do it. And I think that difference between the judgment of what might go wrong versus willing to get started and then just assess when something, like, I mean, I've certainly been in places, and I'm thinking about like projects I do around my house when I just, like, in my head make this up and I'm just gonna go buy the lumber and crap to do it. I would rather get going, get started, and then when I come to a fork in the road, be like, okay, now what? Rather than sit there and know that no progress is being made and all I'm doing is thinking about all the worst things that can go wrong. That yields no success and no progress. And so, in that, I don't know that I was necessarily that way with sports, but I do think that there can be different aspects of your life where you're able to be less judgmental
Yeah.
on your outcomes.
Things that you don't feel reflect on your identity and worth, you're much more apt to dive in.
Sure.
And the goal, I think, like, we'll just use athletics. If we can approach athletics with that same sense of like,
it's not defining.
Right. Like the outcome doesn't define you, but maybe, like, I've talked to a team in the fall and dealing with a lot of injuries, and my goal is to get them to reframe how they saw themselves, and instead of being distracted by what we didn't have, we're going to be fighters no matter what. We're going to show up and we're going to fight like crazy no matter what. And I know there's this song by Paul Otten called Fight Like the Devil, and that's it. No matter what, I'm fighting. I'm going to keep getting up, keep getting up, keep getting up. My son listens to that song regularly, which is awesome. But that's if we can adopt an identity based on some qualities that we've developed, growth mindset kind of thinking, as opposed to just something that's totally based on our performance outcome, then we've got a lot better shot. But in the moment, the biggest reason we can't be thinking technical thoughts or even tactical thoughts in the moment is because we're almost always going to be distracted and stilted in our movements, and the thoughts that pop in are not helpful. And that's where we don't really trust, because we don't really believe we can do it.
Precisely.
So that's where we get in a lot of trouble. But that's, whether it's a fast moving reactive kind of sport, or something where you have a lot of time. And, tennis, there's
time.
Moments where there's plenty of time. Baseball, lots of time. But every sport has a between play.
Yep.
Every performance there's time to think.
Right.
And, if you were playing the piano in a recital and you're thinking about, okay, now it's this note, now it's this note, now it's this note, now it's this key. Like, well, forget it.
That sounds so good.
But yet sometimes in athletics, we'll get a lot of technical feedback during play.
Yes.
That, like, really, you want a shooter in basketball to be thinking about their follow through while they're shooting?
With the defender in front of right, yeah.
Like, it's impossible to be smooth that way.
Yeah.
And so the quiet mind thing is crucial, because one, it gives you the ability to shut self one up, and two, it just allows you then to express yourself, or even in a learning situation, it allows you to kind of feel what we're doing. And that is ultimately, like, when I am giving lessons or something like that, I'll say things like, where did you feel your shoulder was on that? or tell me where your elbow is on that. Or before they start, I'll say something like, just feel where your left hand goes.
Yeah, just pay attention.
And that's it. And not your left hand needs to go here.
Right.
And nope, you didn't do it.
Right.
I've seen so many
Yep.
athletic instruction moments where it's just nope, you didn't do it.
Well, that's so disruptive and frazzling for the athlete.
Well, it's yeah.
Like when I
terrible.
think, I mean, I don't remember specifically what the drill was, but it was some sort of outside hitter drill where basically you had to dig a ball and then go hit real fast on repeat, which is very exhausting by the second dig because you're having to transition and approach, and
especially if you're not in shape.
Especially if you're not in shape and it's preseason and they're really just trying to check your summer efforts. No, but that's an exhausting drill no matter what shape you're in if you're going long enough.
Yep.
And when the directions of the drill are like full transition, full approach, dig it well to your setter, like, so you're focusing on all these, do it at your absolute best and do it on repeat over and over and be successful every single time. When you have all of those expectations and criteria for this thing that's already daunting in itself before anyone gives you any critique, when every time there's a comment on the dig and a comment on the transition and a comment on the approach and a comment on the arm swing, like, you're never going to be successful in that drill. And I just remember getting so utterly frustrated. Like, what's the drill called when someone's playing defense and they're just throwing balls at, like, the pit or something? Pit drill. That's intended to be hard. You're not going to necessarily dig a good ball. And if every time you touched a ball, someone was critiquing where it landed on the court, you're not going to be successful at getting to the other balls, right? That's just a constant, like, that's the ball. I mean, for people who don't know, that's the drill where you're just someone standing in the back of the court and you're throwing balls all over the place. You just have to touch every single ball. Mm-hmm. If every time the coach throws a ball, they're criticizing where the pass was on the last one, like, your effort, like your physical effort and exertion ability, I think decreases. When your mind's like, okay, well, that sucked, the next one's going to suck too. It makes it very difficult to physically make your body run faster or dive for that next ball, because it's just that lack of success, I guess, or affirmation that the effort is good enough makes the next bit of effort that much harder. And so that's why I kept posting those similar clips of us from the last episode of just like the constant chatter from an external source on top of what's already happening in the athlete's mind is just 100% means for
death.
Failure.
Yeah, you're not going to do it. And that's the describing performances, whether in practice or games, is good or bad.
Yep.
Hey, good ball. Even if you never say
bad,
crap ball, bad ball, ball sucked.
Good ball suggests there is a bad ball.
Yes. And so that's where I really try not to do that.
Yeah.
And instead, if I'm encouraging, I may encourage effort.
Yes.
But I want them, I don't want to distract them. Like I watched a baseball player the other night. He was hitting, and the first swing smoked it. And there was difficult conditions, even in a batting cage scenario. Balls were coming fast. And he received praise, and then the next three were pop up, pop up, pop up. And
you're trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, and he was, I think he was a little unsure of himself when he first went in there because it was kind of a new drill, and had instant success, but then it was pointed out, and then it was like struggle.
You set the bar,
like,
right?
And it's just, he's not going in there unconsciously and just ripping it.
Yeah.
Instead, he's thinking about, I better rip it, and he's comparing himself to other players, and he wants to please the coaches, wants to impress teammates. Yeah. So all of these judging, comparing kinds of thoughts, which are natural, which is why we have to quiet our minds. Like, you just can't perform well. And in a reactive situation, you can't perform well. But guess what? Even if it's a situation where you have time to think, like in volleyball, serve receive is a great example. There is no, like, I suck at passing. Now, I've seen people who had great touch at passing, not kind of naturally or whatever. But I think anybody can learn to pass. What gets in the way is,
I'm bad at passing.
Yeah, and so I'm just not a good passer.
Right.
Okay, well, if that's how you're going to define yourself,
sure, you're never going to be. Yeah.
You are done. And I watch passers, and you can kind of tell in their eyes when they recognize the ball.
Yep.
And there's so much white noise kind of distracting thoughts going through their minds that they see the ball really late. and they react to the ball late, and then it's not a very good pass. But I think if they were able to just quiet the mind,
Focus
and
on
there's
the
some
single task at hand.
and there's some visual techniques I think are really interesting. At some point, we'll talk about them. But all of a sudden, if you're seeing the ball when it's halfway to the net on the other side versus over the net halfway to you, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And so the ability to kind of manipulate that is legitimate. But that's where, I mean, I watched a video with Tim Gallwey. He had Cy Wakeman, who wrote the book No Ego, and it's reality-based leadership. That No Ego, that's probably a book we'll have to talk about. That is a heck of a book. But she's not a tennis player. She had read his book just from a business leader kind of perspective, but she wound up flying out to California and having a tennis lesson with him. It's on YouTube, and she goes from like swinging and missing and has never played tennis before to bing, 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 and it's a fascinating little 7-minute video on learning and being open, and kind of being able to shove judgment aside in order to allow yourself to flourish. So that's the judgment thing. That is like job one when it comes to quieting the mind, and reason one why we want to quiet the mind, because judgment creates tension, and that's problematic. That's why coaching, where it's like good, I mean, I see that all the time. That was great. But then what happens?
They don't say that. Yeah.
So
like
never
what's
mind.
Inferred from the
never mind like what they're learning. If you say something
bad,
very critical, but the quiet the mind thing is the secret sauce to performance, and it shouldn't be secret. Like, everybody should know this, and it doesn't matter what performance category you're falling into, whether you're giving a speech or trying to hit a baseball.
I think a lot of times too, coaches or just what we think we should do is to eliminate our reaction to the judgment from others. We had I guess it was considered at the time our conference rival was High Point when we would play them. And their crowd, because they have a pretty small sized gym, and so when it's packed in there, it's rowdy and loud. And so we played them at home. So their fans came hard, and they would call out individual players for really crappy things. But our coach had the men's and women's basketball team come in and stand in the sidelines and heckle us, more or less, which I thought was wildly unhelpful. I kind of understood the thought behind that. I just thought it was when it's your friends, it's a whole different thing too, right? But in that scenario, I think that the attempt there is to be able to tune out outside factors. I can get down with that idea. And, people always talk about, teaching your kids not to worry about what other people think, and just as long as you're proud and this and that. But at the same rate, sometimes cutting out the external judgment makes your internal even higher, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, I'm not going to worry about them, but as long as I'm not worried about them, I got to make sure that I'm in check. I tend to be that way sometimes. And so I think from a coaching perspective or a parenting perspective or any type of leadership type role, yes, encourage people to cut out the judgment from outside sources, but at the same rate, equally as important, probably more important in my opinion, is to be able to cut out the judgment from self, which is challenging.
Yeah, I think so often athletes in those kind of positions they don't even hear what's being said from the stands. They're too busy listening to themselves.
Yeah.
Unless they're in this zone where then they hear nothing, which is great but exceedingly rare, I think, for the most part. That's why training to quiet your mind, training to be aware of your thoughts, we'll, in a later date, we'll talk more about how exactly to do that. But one, it's doable, and you'll never stumble into that.
Right.
Unless every 1 in a million times or 1,000 times or something, you may just be unconscious. But, we'd probably like to approach peak performance levels more often than that. So that kind of, I know he uses the bounce hit thing, giving your mind something else to think of that's neutral or non-judgmental. So then you develop a kind of a rhythm too. I know he had, in the video he had with Cy Wakeman having her serve, she had kind of a little cadence, kind of rhythm to toss and swing. The beauty of that was she's just thinking about the rhythm, and she's not thinking about, that toss wasn't high enough, or I missed 2 in a row. And the same goes like, the tennis example where you're returning a forehand or whatever, and you're just bounce hit, and that's a really good tool to use, and you can develop those kinds of things for, I think, most activities, in order to kind of take your mind off the judgment process, and just kind of give yourself a neutral thing to pay attention to.
I remember when you and I were at a local volleyball game, State versus Pitt, and like the outcome was defined, right? Like that we for the 1 in a million chance of the other outcome occurring, and you looked over at me and you were like, I wonder how. I don't know if it was a posed question or just a general comment, but like how NC State mentally prepares for that game, like knowing that you're gonna walk away probably 0-3. How do you because I mean State's a great team, or they were.
Yeah, they made the tournament. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. But when you're going up against a team that is still just going to spank you anyway, ranked number 1 in the country, how do you go in there knowing that you are a very, really good, solid team, knowing that that's going to be the outcome? And that's hard to do. It's hard when there's a team that's used to being able to go into matches and play their best and do really well and maybe probably win in 4 kind of thing, versus knowing that like we're probably going to walk out of here at a home match, not winning a single set in this. It's hard for those athletes or the coaches to get those athletes to still play in their flow state where they are still playing their best regardless of what this proposed outcome is going to be. It's very challenging to get through.
Yes, and I look at that a couple ways. One, I'm never going to go into a game like we can find a way. There's a way.
Sure.
Now,
I think a lot of coaches do that too. Like,
yeah. That being said, if our identity and worth as an athlete and as a team is solely based on whether we win that match or not, that almost guarantees that we will not find a way. And we will be like, the more we can be like in this moment right here with everything we have, the better we're going to play in that moment.
Yeah, not focusing on the win or loss at the end of this, but play by play.
And that takes training. Like, you cannot do that. You can't just show up. Okay, now I'm going to really be in the moment, like every moment over and over. Like, forget it. I remember early on my volleyball coaching life, we were playing a team that 2-time undefeated state champ. We were the opposite of that. And my pregame, I said, don't think about winning. Like, they haven't lost in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Here's what I want us to think about and be concentrated on. Fighting with everything we have so that everybody in that gym knows how much we care, what kind of competitors we are. That's who we are. If you do that, you win.
Yeah.
And I will give them credit. They went out there and raged. And I mean, there were times when like the other team like would hit a ball and bounce off the top of a blocker's head. I mean, they were just physically like better, skill set wise, and just physically. We played so hard that whole match. I had parents from the other team coming up to me afterwards saying, that's the hardest anybody's played against us in 2 years.
Yeah.
And
that's way more of a
I mean, I really remember that.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing, one, we're supposed to be teaching through all this anyway, that no matter what, you just come and bring it.
Yeah.
And then 2, maybe you catch somebody off day where they're not really paying attention to the extent they need to be. Maybe they're assuming an outcome, but you go in swinging and with full belief in every point that you have the ability to execute. And then if it's good enough, it's good enough. If it's not, it's not. But you don't want to play, as Mike Tomlin says, living in your fears. And that's not a way that you leave that match with no regrets. But if you have prepared mentally, emotionally, physically to the max, then you go in there and that's how you perform.
Right.
And
the outcome is the outcome.
Yeah.
Well, I think too in those scenarios, from a coaching perspective, and maybe you can speak to this. Well, you can speak to this more than me. But in that scenario, because we talk about not giving constant feedback all the time, especially in a game scenario, for the coach who's going in to play another team where the outcome is pretty much to be sure you're not going to win, trying to coach a kid, trying to say go out and do your best, and then also mid-game when they're not having success, trying to tell them how to fix it, is conflicting advice. Yeah. What do you do to support your player in that case when they just aren't having success?
Even from a coaching standpoint, you have to have the ability to observe non-judgmentally,
right?
Rather than get emotional, lose control. And I mean, there's sometimes, okay, they go up and they smash it and they dent the floor, and you just laugh and say, all right, next point. It's still only 1 point.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I had an 18s triangle team. Mike Frank and I coached that team, and they were a tough crew, and we were playing a really physical team from a big city, and like in hitting lines, you watch them, it's like whoa. But we also knew, like tactically, we could do things that would put them in a position where they couldn't play like that, and so that's like our players watched. They were not peeing their pants and oh gosh, look at them.
Right.
Instead, they were
like, how can we take that out of system?
Yeah, this is what we're gonna do. And if that girl is hitting 5 feet further off the net than that, guess what? She can't take that swing.
Yep.
And that's based on like our serving strategies, and that's what we did. And they executed it, and they won the game. And a lot of people were surprised. Like people who came to watch it were kind of assuming this other team was just going to blow through us. And I had some congratulatory pats on the back afterwards, but it was just them not worrying about what they didn't have and measuring themselves that way. But instead, they locked in on what they did have and expressed themselves fully. But they were able to step back, see it for what it was, and said, okay, then we got to figure out what we're going to do. Yep. Fortunately, we practiced a lot how we kind of tied serving to blocking and things like that. Mike did a great job with all of that. And the ability to remove judgment from the process is the foundation for like quiet mind, which then allows all the other things to occur. But if you can't if your whole worth and identity is wrapped up in the score and whether you win or lose, you're going to struggle. Puts a lot of pressure
just
on
how well you play. It doesn't have to be a measure of a score, but just if you're wrapped up in people's view of you or your own view of you, being in how well you execute a particular skill, that can crumble real quickly. Yeah,
and then you're not in the moment or present or whatever. You're distracted by the past or worried about the future, and tying your worth to those outcomes as opposed to I'm just going to be in it non-judgmentally, which then allows there won't be any mental interference if that's the approach you take, and you're just competing. And there, Ken Ravizza, he talks a lot in his book Heads Up Baseball 2.0. Okay, how can you compete when you're not in that zone? And so even training, right, I don't feel great, but being able to just come at it, all of that has to be trained too.
Oh, for sure.
And that's why, we talk all the time, don't say the negative out loud, and being able to substitute thoughts, because you do have to be able to compete after you just gave up a home run. I know I was talking to John Link, who's president of my son's travel baseball organization, and he was relating a story when he was in his first spring training with the Dodgers, and I think it was the Dodgers, maybe not. Greg Maddux was there, so maybe it wasn't. But advice Greg Maddux gave him was, you control everything in the process until you let go of that ball. And you have to be good with that. So whether they smoked it, whether someone makes an error behind you, whether the ump blows the call, none of that's under your control. And so that's the stuff that you have to keep pushing aside. And if you're just locked in to you doing your thing and you stop trying to control the things outside of your ability to control them, you're going to play better. And that whole thing starts with a detachment and a removal of judgment from this learning process and performance process.
I think too, in being able to sort of play freely without judgment from yourself or from others, the ability to let go of a mistake also is, when you're younger, when you first, again, we'll stick with volleyball, when you miss a serve and you're like, oh, you're finding some excuse of why that happened.
Right.
Or in college I was serving and I don't even think I was trying to serve a short ball, and the ball barely made it to my own 10-foot line. I just don't know what happened. It was a real good, mid-game this happened, but it didn't throw me off for the next one. I don't know if my feet got caught. Something really absurd happened, and my ability to just laugh that off and say things like that are going to happen, and that's not how I serve, right? That is something that happened. It's not going to have anything to do with my next time I get up to serve. just even like those little things, ability to sort of let things roll off, or roll off who's in the stands, or roll off who's not in the stands, or what happened last time you performed this skill, is part of it comes with maturity, and just I think the more you make dumb mistakes like that, the more you're accepting of like, okay, this stuff's gonna happen.
Well, your identity and worth wasn't tied to that.
Sure.
And knowing, like, I know who I am.
Yeah,
And
I'm
I
a
know
better
what I'm
server than
capable
that.
of.
Right,
Right.
right. But also, I'm a better server than that. But even still, that's not my identity and worth, and that's not all
Right.
that I bring to this. And so, I think that some of it just comes with practice and accepting that things are going to happen, and you learn how to move on. But if every single time something goes wrong, it turns to, I suck, I failed. What are they going to think of me? But also, on the other direction, though, like coaches need to be aware too. When kids make a mistake, like you gotta let them make a mistake. If you yank them, then their worth is definitely gonna be tied up in that mistake or that skill next time they go to attempt it. But just allowing that feel and that flow and that autocorrect to take place is critical to the comeback.
Well, and then we aren't just criticizing ourselves.
Right.
Instead, we're aware of what happened.
Yeah.
And then we're able to move, like we make some adjustments.
Well, I liked these sort of examples of like, instead of saying that was a bad shot, say I noticed my wrist was tight, or instead of saying
Right.
I suck at this, I felt off balance that time. Just, I mean, you may still feel like saying I felt off balance is like critical, but it's just more of an assessment, I think, than a critique. Maybe is a better way to put it. But in coaching, like rather than saying like, oh, that was a great set, like maybe like way to find that play. It doesn't have to be something that is necessarily a good or bad. Find some other form, because I don't think that the praise or affirmation of success itself is the wrongdoing. It's the right versus wrong that has
Right.
a judgment attached to it in one direction or the other that is, I guess, potentially harmful, if you will. So finding different ways in either as the athlete in your own mind to assess and affirm maybe, and then coaches also either learning to just quiet and just let the players play, but if you're going to say something, making sure there's no judgment attached one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we create an environment where they're losing themselves in their play and just playing unconsciously. I vividly remember a match at Gibbons. It was the last year. We had changed how we trained dramatically, and much more them, much less us from the sidelines. And I won't say who we played, but they were a good team. And they were in a zone the entire match.
Your team?
Yes. I remember this for a 3-set match. We made a total of 4 errors hitting or serving in 3 sets, which means that's only 4 points we gave away.
Yeah.
It was insane. And I remember just sitting there. I wouldn't say I was in shock because they were really good. So many good players in that team. And I had a friend who had 2 daughters on the team, and during the match, he was a coach, and he comes behind my bench and says, "This is the single most dominating performance I've ever seen in my life." And of course, he had a bunch of F-bombs in there, like in the middle of the match, and I'm just like looking at him like, "What are you doing?" But it was unforgettable. The stuff they were doing that was just so unconscious at a really high level, and the other team just kind of didn't know what to do with it. And I'll never forget that match. Like Maddie Bug was in that team, Tori Phillips, Avery Strebel, Michelle Fadul was on that team, Christina Dorsman, Caroline Albright. It was a really stacked team. But they were so experienced, and then the way we trained, just like letting them go do it, and they just really took that and ran with it. But that's what is possible, even for a sustained period of time in a really reactive sport, which also there are periods where you could think unhelpful thoughts. So I think being able to just be aware rather than critical, that's how you learn and progress, I think, quickly. And never mind on performance day, that's how you are able to like fully express yourself and play to your capabilities, perform to your capabilities, whatever it is. Judging your performance versus looking at it and learning and improving.
Yeah, rather than that was great or that was bad. Being able to evaluate the performance, use information from that or data from that to go forward is going to be way more helpful than just a very blanket, that was good, that was bad.
Yep. Well, it's just, we can't take it. like, like we're already judging our own performance automatically, and then, which is not helpful. Then if you have like outside sources, whether it's teammates or coaches, adding to that, like, you got to have a really evolved performer to be able to like take that and run with it. And sometimes, like, I've read plenty of instances where the player was tough enough to like whatever keep swinging.
Yeah.
But it's rare.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very common. But and I think what we don't want to be either is like fragile. Where based on circumstances we're collapsing because of what people say or what they're yelling at us from the stands. Instead, we just want to keep with full knowing and belief. Yeah, we're coming. We ain't stopping. Don't forget to pick up your copy of the 50th anniversary edition of the Inner Game of Tennis. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.